Brother Saidu, we're okay? Okay. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. So, the book that we are going through today for our Brilliant Books for Brilliant Minds series, it is called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And it is written by a man by the name of Clay Scroggins. And Clay Scroggins is actually a pastor in a church. So the book is actually written from the perspective, which is very similar to the Masajid, in the sense that it is an organization for spiritual or religious purposes. And you tend to have multiple layers of leadership. Just like we have in Masajid, we have in the churches and synagogues, you have the religious leadership, you also have the administrative leadership. In our families, we would say that in our families we have sometimes multiple, you could say, where power rests, right? So before I got married, I used to think that when I get married, I will be the boss at home, right? When I got married, I realized that not yet. There was a boss at home. So now the wife may feel like, when I get married, then I will be in charge of the house and I will do whatever I want. And in some things she gets to, sometimes some things she doesn't get to. So basically he begins by saying, and I will go through quickly, inshallah, maybe hopefully in less than 30 minutes, inshallah, we'll cover and then we'll take some Q&A. He says that so many times we are fooled by the idea that we are given some responsibility and then we are now the leader. But he says that leadership and authority are not a package deal. Meaning sometimes you might be given a position, but no one follows you. You have a position, so what? And sometimes people follow a person who doesn't have a position at all. If any sisters would like to join us downstairs, we have a lot of empty space down here, so you can come and join us downstairs. But if you are remaining upstairs, if you talk, we can still hear. And same goes for brothers as well, inshallah. So he says that, can anybody think of an example of someone who was a leader or is a leader but doesn't have any position? Can anybody think of any? King of England has a position but no authority. Anyone? Anybody? Muslim, non-Muslim, anybody? You're going too deep. Give me something that people can remember. Give me non-controversial examples. Okay, think about the prophets of Allah, right? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca. Think about Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam, throughout his life, he was basically someone who was, from the Islamic tradition, he was never like a kingly type person. He lived a simple life. But subhanAllah, look at the amount of followers that claim to be following Ibrahim alayhi salam. More recent examples, if you think about people like Martin Luther King, right? This is someone who there was no organization at a national level that he was basically heading, but simply because he was a good speaker, he was a charismatic person, people followed him and they used that to basically lead a powerful movement to meet certain goals that they wanted to meet. You have, for example, Isa alayhi salam. And of course, these examples are not equal. I'm just going up and down. Of course, the prophets of Allah are the best of people. Isa alayhi salam was a simple person who didn't have any position of authority, but he had so much influence that he was a threat to the powers that be. Because of his teaching, his influence is basically the key word. So he says that many times we find ourselves in a situation where we feel like we have authority, so we should also have influence, but that doesn't go together. We may have authority, but no one listens to us. And how many Okay, I can't ask this question and get a straight answer. The question I was thinking of, how many brothers feel like they have a position of authority at home, but no one listens to them? So, who do people listen to? One of my friends, he told me, another imam, he said that when a family is young, when the children are young, the powerful position in the house is the father's, who is bringing home the bread. When the children grow up, then the powerful position is occupied by the mom. Because now the kids have grown up and they have become her support. Now dad can't mess with them. So he told me, he said that if you ever look around like a family that has adult children, if you look carefully, you will see that the dad just follows the mom around. She is the one who is the matriarch of the family. She is the real powerhouse in the family. Because now, if dad, when the kids were young, dad was the powerhouse. Now that the kids are older, now dad knows he can't mess with her anymore. Even if he ever did, but alhamdulillah, inshallah, it should be a relationship of love and respect. So now he says, you find yourself in a position where you feel like you were supposed to be a leader, but no one listens to you. What do you do in this case? He says in this case, a lot of people, they feel inhibited, they feel constrained, they feel undervalued. They're like, man, I can do so much more, but no one listens to me. So what can you do in order to increase that and change that and bring about a positive change? He says, real leaders don't sit back and point fingers. Real leaders don't sit back and point fingers. Rather, they are people who lead whether they have authority or not. They lead whether they have authority or not. It only takes you, yourself, and he says one of the things that will come up later, he says, remember that if there's no one that you can influence, there's one person that you can influence. Who is that? That's yourself. So start by leading yourself. When you lead yourself well, other people will want to follow you as well. Think about it in the Muslim world today, right? Give it that example. That a lot of us, we would probably say that we don't have really good leadership. And if we do see good leadership, do we wish to be their followers? Yes. We are hungry for good leadership. So he says that one of the things you can do is be a good leader to yourself. And you will see that other people, when they see that example that you are setting, they will want to come and you will be able to influence them as well. Then he says that many people at the top of organizations are not leaders. And many people at the bottom are absolute leaders, even though they have no authority. And that's why a lot of times when there's like some sort of unrest in an organization, the leadership at the top realizes that there are certain people that have no position of authority, but everybody listens to them. So when they have this unrest and they need to negotiate, who do they call? They call those people. They say, hey, come and talk to us. We want to talk to you. Okay, what's going on? Because they realize that this person is someone that has influence over others. They listen to him. They follow him. So let's talk to this person. So all of a sudden, this person, without any authority, now the people with real authority are asking him, hey, can you help us out? Can you help us out? So he says that it doesn't matter if you have a position of authority or not, you can still lead. But there are some things you may have to change. He says, number one, he says, remember that wielding the gun of authority is not something that works. And no one likes that, and no one likes to be told, hey, I'm in charge. So if you are waiting to lead until you're given a position of authority, so then you can go around and you can say, hey, by the way, I'm in charge here. You need to do this. Do you think that's going to make a difference? It's not. In fact, people will even disobey you even more because you are wielding the gun of authority and nobody likes that. He says that people who do that, they make people feel small, they micromanage, and they take credit for other people's work. And no one likes that type of leader. So if you are waiting to be a leader when you get authority, you probably don't really want to wait because it's not really necessarily a good position. Individuals that have to tell you they're in charge cannot attain true followers and lead. Nobody wants to follow those people, but rather it's usually people who are lower in the organizational chart that may be the most influential people. He says influence always outpaces authority. Influence always outpaces authority. So what we can work on is, how can I influence? How can I influence even though I don't have authority? And you don't need authority for that. So then the next chapter, he says that the first thing that you need to address if you want to lead even though you're not in charge is to identify who you are and what is it that you want to do. He said a lot of times this problem, that internal problem that happens when a person feels like, hey, I'm supposed to lead, but nobody listens to me. So he says a lot of times what happens is the person themselves is figuring themselves out. And he says that sometimes we have what's called, sometimes what we have is fake identity. He says sometimes we have multiple passports, meaning we change our identity to fit a position. And we have our own principles, but when we see a certain position, we change our authority, change our identity in order to try to fit into that. He said it's like example of this is like you have multiple passports. You show one passport going here, one passport going there. Do you think that's a good thing? You get caught and you go to jail for that, right? He says sometimes we use a fake ID. Using a fake ID, he says sometimes we hide who we really are. We hide who we really are, and we sometimes project a fake image, meaning someone who is trying to present themselves as someone who is a righteous person, but they're not actually righteous. He says this is like using a fake ID to get through a door. And he says if you do this, you may get through the door, but no one will follow you, and you will not be able to really bring any positive change because you are, at the end of the day, an imposter. He says, number 3, he says sometimes on our IDs, okay, I don't want to ask anybody to raise their hand, but I'm sure there is somebody there that has misrepresented their height and weight on their driver's license. Okay, make yourself a little bit taller than you really are. Make yourself a little bit thinner than you really are. So he says this is like distorting our identity and thinking highly of ourselves when we are not really there, right? A person may think like, what's wrong with me? Why don't people choose me to do this? And it's kind of like you are thinking of yourself higher than you are, and it's not a good habit to have in a regular person, especially someone who wants to be a leader of change in a positive way. A person should think well of themselves, but not think highly of themselves, meaning they shouldn't think, I'm the best that there is. Then he says, one thing to keep in mind is that there is a fine line between ambition and greed. What's ambition and what's greed? So if you think about somebody who wants to bring change, in order for them to bring change, they need to have ambition. But he says that ambition, which is run wild, which is not in control, doesn't follow principles, it can become greed for more and more. Okay, and if you think about in many of our Muslim countries, you have these young people who maybe bring about a revolution in some good promises. Eventually, they end up becoming the worst and the most oppressive dictators. Because this is ambition running wild. But he says that if you feel that you are in a place where you're not being able to lead, and you have ambition, you're going to get a thought which is just give up everything, just put your head down, and don't worry about anything else. He says this is also not something, so he says from a Christian perspective, he says God doesn't want you to do that. And I would agree that Islamically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to just put our head down and mind our own business. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that you as an ummah are people as an ummah who command good and forbid evil. You are trying to bring positive change in society around you. You're not supposed to just put your head down. So he says that, so he has a chapter. Of course, what I'm sharing here is not meant to replace you reading the book. Okay, so this is just to introduce the main concepts, but you will get more detail, inshallah. And this book, by the way, is available in some of the digital libraries. So from digital libraries, for example, there's one app called Libby, where you go to Libby and you can get this app. You can get this book in Libby and you can listen to it or read it through the library system. So you borrow the book digitally, read it, or listen to it. So then he says that, moving on, he says, what can we do to become better leaders? He says, number one is lead yourself. The first thing is, if you want to be a better leader, lead yourself. He says, everyone is in charge of something, and if you are not in charge of anything, at least you're in charge of yourself. But can you give me an example of anyone who's not in charge of anything, but they are still in charge of some things? Can anybody give me an example? Meaning there are some things that are still under your authority. What is that? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Okay. Controlling your behavior, but what about more than your own self? So I'll give you an example. If you come in to the masjid and you see that the shoes are all over the place, do you need someone with a executive letterhead to come and give you a letter saying, brother, you have the permission to do something about this? You don't. If you go to the masjid bathroom, for example, and there's a little mess there, do you need anyone's permission to tidy things up a little bit? You don't. So small little things like that, it can actually bring about the first example of you being a leader. A leader doesn't wait for someone to give them an authority, but whatever they are allowed to do, they do it. And that actually makes people want to follow this person. It makes them impressed that, okay, you know what, this person is not someone who just talks, but this person is ready to do. So one of the first things that we need to do is change our mindset from being a consumer, that we come, we take, and we go. But rather, we need to become producers, which is that we come and we add value and increase whatever we came, and when we leave, we left more than what we took. Once we change that mindset, he says that's the first thing that we need to change. He says, number two, okay, let me just mention one more point about leading yourself. He says, when placed in a position where you are working for someone else, it's easy to blame them for the lack of your leadership, saying, my boss doesn't let me do anything. But in all reality, there's a lot that you can do. In vast majority of situations, unless you're in prison, even in prison, there are some things that you can do to display good leadership. And we have the example of Yusuf alayhi salam in the Quran, that in prison, whatever he could do, he has zero influence on the outside world. He is in prison, but Yusuf alayhi salam shows such amazing leadership qualities that he goes from the prison to the palace of the king, because of whatever he did in the prison with just two other people. That's all. So it may surprise you, but you are in charge of yourself. Just because you're not in charge doesn't mean you cannot take charge. He says then the next thing is, he says you need to have a game plan. Whatever you want to change, he says you need to have a game plan. He says number one, self-leadership principle number one is model followership. Model followership. Can anybody think about what that means? Okay. You want to be a leader. Do you know how to be a follower? Most people are not willing to be a follower, but they want other people to follow them. Right? If you look at Abu Bakr radiallahu an, Abu Bakr radiallahu an, for the period that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is there, is Abu Bakr a leader or a follower? He is a follower. He is the best follower that there is. And this being the best follower that there is makes him the leader after the Prophet ﷺ. When I was a teenager, an older friend of mine, a mentor you could say, he gave me some advice. And this is my personal experience. He said because I was a young kid, we're going back now 20 years, I had done hifz, I had done memorization of the Quran, and it wasn't so common to find a hafiz during that time. So everywhere I would go, if I went to high school, they'd say, okay, you are the president of the school MSA. If I went to the masjid, they'd say, you, Hafiz Saab, please lead the salah. I'm like 13-year-old kid, 14-year-old kid, you lead the salah. If I go in a group of friends, the friends automatically say, okay, you tell us what we need to do, you lead the salah. So this friend of mine, he gave me some amazing advice, and I cannot thank him enough. He said, Jawad, everywhere you go, you end up becoming the leader. But do you know how to follow? You need to learn how to follow. Then you can be a good leader. And subhanAllah, so important that if you don't know how to be a follower, and if you've never been a follower, you cannot be a good leader, because when you want people to do something but you can't think of what you're asking them to do because you've never put yourself in that position, you are not going to get followers. If you are asking someone to wake up at 3 a.m. to go do something for you, and you yourself have never ever done it in your life, how can you understand how difficult it is what you're asking them to do? And that's a really important principle, that the best leaders are the ones who come up from the trenches. They come up from the lowest levels because they know how people feel. And that's why people can connect with them, because they're like, you know what, this guy knows our pain. And Allah tells us in the Quran that the prophets that He sent us, the prophets have been made our leaders. But Allah says that the prophets, they are just like you human beings. They feel all the same feelings, the hunger, pain, everything that you fear, they fear as well. Because then they can be a good example for us. In the same way, so sometimes what my wife does is that she basically takes all the leftover food, she mixes it all up, and like maybe some fruits or something like that, make a milkshake out of it, and gives it to the kids. So I tell her, okay, can you start with yourself? She says, no, I don't want to drink it. So I tell her, why are you giving the kids something, even though it's healthy, you are asking them to do something that you are not willing to do yourself? That doesn't sound right to me. First, you do it yourself. Yes, it's healthy and it has a lot of benefits and you want the best for the kids and stuff like that. But you know what? You're asking them to swallow something bitter. You should be willing to do it yourself. You know the example of the Prophet ﷺ, when one companion comes to him and he lifts up his shirt. He says, Ya Rasulullah, look, I'm so hungry that I have to tie a stone to my stomach in order to basically, they say that if you didn't do that, you were so hungry that your intestines would get tangled inside. So you would press something down to put some pressure to keep them in place. So can you imagine if this companion came to the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet has a massive platter of food in front of him and he says, may Allah make it easy for you, brother. I will make dua for you. What this man would think. The Prophet ﷺ, he lifts up his own shirt and he says, I have 2 stones here. He had 2 stones. He says, I am more hungry than you are. Now, this person goes back and saying, you know what? My leader is not throwing me to the dogs and enjoying himself. But rather, he is right there with us. He's ahead of us. That makes a huge difference. So he says, never ask anyone to do something that you are not willing to do yourself. If you do so, They might follow you once or twice, maybe because you commanded them or something, but they're not happy to do so. But if you are willing to do it yourself, and you have done it yourself, you will see that the people will follow as well. The next thing he talks about, he says that monitor your heart and behavior. You want to lead. You want to bring change. Why? He says, check your heart for jealousy. Check your heart for anger. Check your heart that are you wanting to lead because you want to bring positive change, or are you wanting to lead because you want to be in the spotlight? Or you had a rival who beat you, got to that position. Now you are pretending that you want to bring positive change, but what you really want to do is you want to knock him down and you want to take that spot. He says, check your heart very carefully. And then he says, make a plan. How do you want to go about it? And of course, it requires discipline, having a vision. Then he says, check positivity. Make sure that you have a positive mindset. If you want to be someone, you don't have any position of authority in an organization, in a city, positive energy makes people be attracted to you. When you give them hope, and it's not fake hope. You're not just saying the words, but you believe it, people will want to come with you. They'll say, yes, show me. You know that famous speech, which is, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day the children, a white child and a black child, will be holding hands together and walking to school. This image that he presented is something that made people want to say, yes, I want that. I believe in that dream. So we have to be positive. So people who are basically thinking everybody is bad, people are the worst, they cannot see any good coming from anyone, people don't want to follow those type of leaders. So he says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we are conditioned to see it. So if we are very negative, we will see the whole world as very negative. If we are very positive, we will see the world as a positive place where there's lots of hope and lots of improvement that is possible. So he says leaders that feel a sense of ownership, they spread enthusiasm. They are themselves enthusiastic. They own a project. They do it with so much excitement that everybody else wants to come and do it. Okay, so think about this. Let's say that we needed to paint the masjid. So some brother comes in and he says, man, I don't know why they gave me this job. If I paint this wall, next week it's going to be dirty again. What are we going to do? We're going to say, let's leave this brother to his work and let's get out of here. Right? Another guy comes in here. He says, you know what? MashaAllah, this masjid is going to look beautiful. Just give me 12 hours. When I'm done with this place is going to look amazing. How do you feel? You want to give him a hand? Yes. You're like, man, this guy is selling a positive image. I want to be part of that. So spread positivity. And this is one of the characteristics of leaders, that they spread enthusiasm and they provide superior customer service. How can you provide customer service? One of the very important things is, again, that when you're asking people to do something, think about what they must be going through in their situation. Right? One of the things that I learned and I try to practice is that if I call someone to do something, I think about, okay, this man, he is a newly married guy. So what is the life of a newly married guy normally like? Is this a time when I could ask him to come and do something? Or is this not a time? Think about that from other people's perspective. If you're asking a sister to do something, think about it. What is a good time for normal? Maybe this person doesn't fit the normal pattern, but first, before you even ask, think about, okay, what this person must be going through. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran about the Sahaba. He tells the Sahaba that when you go to the house of the Prophet, when you're done eating, then what should you do? Then leave. Why? He says the Prophet is shy to tell you, but he has a family, he needs to do other things. So this is a normal etiquette. You go to someone's house, they provide you food, so you're done eating. Then they tell you, we have dessert coming. Okay, they provide you dessert. Okay, in Pakistani culture, the last thing is tea. Okay? If they offer you tea tea is the last thing. Usually if the person is still sitting, not getting up, they say, let's have some tea right now. Okay, that's a signal saying, okay, this is the last thing. So a person should not overstay. Once you have tea, you say, okay, Jazakumullah khair, I'll take your leave, right? And Islamically, you ask your host, would you permit me to leave? And they might say, sure, inshallah, Jazakumullah khair for coming and whatnot. Or they might say, no, hold on. We have something very special coming. It's just delayed. Just wait until my son comes home. He's bringing it. Don't go yet. So the etiquette is you ask your permission. So when you're done eating, you can say, please permit me to leave. They say, no. What do you mean? We got dessert coming. So after you have dessert, you can see what the situation is. But don't keep hanging out. Think about it from other people's perspective as to what they must be going through. So good leaders, they provide good customer service. Each person is a customer. And you deal with each person understanding what this person needs from you. And you try to provide that as best. And truly connect their job to the results within the organization. Okay, so then the next thing he talks about, and we'll get through to some of the meat very quickly. He says, think critically. He says, if you see a problem that you want to change, first, before you can provide solutions, you need to yourself be a critical thinker. First, ask things like, is there a better way of doing this? And you know what? You might do your research, and you might come to the conclusion that this is the best way that's already being done. This is not a way. It's not like they're just being lazy and not doing anything. They have tried, but this problem needs a different type of solution. Okay? He says, then, why do we like this? Why do we like it like this? Why do we do it in this way? Is there a reason for it? And sometimes there's a reason, sometimes there's no reason. It's just people have been doing it, so we've been doing it. Why is this working or not working? What would happen if we stop that? Okay? Everything that we're doing, which is, if you want to kind of make your organization more efficient, you are doing every day when you come, you're doing like 7 things, let's say. You say, okay, we need to do an 8th thing. So let's look at these 7 things. Is every one of these things actually bringing us any benefits? If not, maybe that's where we can say, okay, let's give this a break and try something new, and that could change. But we have to think critically in order to come up with solutions to the problem that we may want to start. He says, we need to change our mindset in some things. He says, start thinking as an owner, not as an employee. Okay, think about if you own a restaurant, how does an employee think when something goes wrong? The employee says, well, that's not my job, it's somebody else's job. The owner says, well, I'm the owner. If someone else is not available to do it, I got to do it. Doesn't matter what the job is, I got to do it. Okay? He says, start scheduling. He says one of the things that a lot of times happens is you meet with people with no real goal in mind, right? For a lot of people, meetings are the worst things about working in teams because a lot of meetings are not done right. So he says every meeting that you have, it should have you should have some, when you meet after that, you need to have some thinking time, processing time. Okay, what's the best way that we could do this problem that was raised? Start thinking critically and start lending. He says, stop giving others a grade and start lending them a hand. If you, using the example of the masjid, if you come and you see, one of the things that we have is, for example, a lot of people say, brother, there is trash all over the place. So what do you think we could do about that? We could say, okay, so first thing is, what is the masjid doing? Like not like blaming, but saying, okay, masjid management, what is your proper procedure that you're currently using to help clean up this area? Is there anything I can help with? Perhaps the masjid might say, you know what, brother, we've been looking for a vendor, some sort of company to help us with this. Do you know anybody? Please let us know. And you might say, yeah, you know what, my brother has a cleaning company and I will ask them to come, whatever. So he says, stop giving others a grade and start lending them a hand, saying, what can I do to help? And you don't necessarily have to clean the toilets, but you might say, you know what, brother, I have a friend who's a plumber. And this plumber says that this type of toilet is not a good toilet because it will always get stuck. Because of the amount of usage that's there, this is designed for residential use, not commercial use. So you might have a solution like that where you might be able to improve a certain process. He says the next thing, the major part he talks about, he says reject passivity. Reject passivity. What is passivity? Passivity is that we come to the masjid and we see that this masjid, there's a leadership, there's a management, they do the way they things. I tried to give them ideas, nobody listened to me. So what do I do now? I'm just not going to take part. I'm just going to come do my thing and leave. Some people, they do that at work. They go to their job and they do their work and they leave. If there's a problem, if there's a leak in the bathroom, if there's a leak in the gas line, say, hey, not my problem. You know, there's this meme online where this guy, when it's 5 p.m., they throw their papers up like this. Have you seen this? It's 5 p.m. I'm off the clock. This is somebody else's problem. When I was young, I attended security training to become a security guard. So in the security training, they said, look, if you are working at a retail store, I'm a teenager at the time and I was going through this while I was in college. So they said, if you are a security guard, you're getting paid $12 an hour. And someone comes and they're stealing a $6 shirt and you see them. What are you supposed to do as a security guard? So you know what our instructor tell us? He said, do this. He said, oh, he got away. Just show that you did something and then say, oh, he got away. He's like, you know what? Your $12 an hour job is not worth you breaking your leg, running after this guy for $6 shirt. He says that guy might have a gun and he might turn around and shoot you. Okay? Now this is the mentality of being an employee. Okay? But when it comes to our family, when it comes to our community organizations, that mindset is what a lot of people have, and that doesn't help. We want to have so what would the owner of that shop do? He would say, man, if it's $6 or 6 cents, it's something that came out of my pocket. I want to try to address that situation in the best way possible. Yes, he might say it's not worth getting injured or shot or anything like that over this. That's a different story. But he won't just give up very easily because this is money coming from his own pocket, right? He has an ownership mindset. So he says, if you want to lead, even though you're not in charge, should you add responsibility to yourself or reduce responsibility from yourself? What do you think? Add. Say, I'm willing to do more. I'm willing to do more. Number 2 is, should you take initiative or should you wait until someone comes and tells you, brother, can you please help us with this? You should take initiative. Should you look around for projects, saying what can be improved, or should you wait until somebody else identifies that these are the 7 areas where we need help in? You should look around, saying, how can I improve this situation? Say, apply this to your family as well, by the way, right? So family, work, community organization, at your work, everywhere. He says, should you pick up tasks that other people want, or should you pick up tasks that other people don't want? What do you think? Who says you should pick up tasks that other people want to do? Raise your hand. You should, and raise your hand if you say you should pick up tasks that other people don't want to do. Well, if the other people want to do it, they're already doing it, right? But if you are someone who is not in charge, but you want to have influence, you want to bring positive change, he says one of the ways to basically increase your influence is to do the projects that nobody wants to do. Right? Take a challenge and help out where no one is willing to help out. Everybody wants to be on stage. But who wants to come 2 hours early and build the stage? And who wants to stay for 2 hours after the program and close up the stage and put it away? He says, if you want to be a leader, then do the task, pick up the task that nobody else wants to do. All right. Now, he says the next thing is at some point you're going to run into a problem, which is that you have an established authority and you have to challenge them. You will challenge them. So think about the most peaceful challengers of the past. They would, eventually they will become a threat to the status quo. So he says that remember that challenge brings change. And change is inherently challenging. When things are changing, people feel threatened. Okay, by the way, I have gone beyond my time. So I'm going to try to finish very quickly, but if you need to leave, you can continue watching online, inshallah. So it's that challenge brings change, and change is inherently challenging. People don't like things changing. People usually say, man, I've been doing this for 60 years, and now this new guy comes and he wants to change everything up, right? We don't like that. He says the more personally your boss relates to his job, the more personal your boss will take your challenges. Okay, now you are the new guy, and you say, look, there's this project, we need to change the way we are working. Now, up until now, who was handling this project? Your boss was. Now that you want to change, you know what your boss feels? Your boss feels that you are attacking his way of working. So this is something to keep in mind. He says any change to the system will be perceived as a criticism of past leadership. So we should be aware that when we are asking for change, some people that are sitting there, they are sitting quietly, but what they are feeling like, who is this guy who wants to change something that I have been doing perfectly well for the last 20 years? He's taking that as a personal threat. Okay, and if you think about in like many of the Muslim countries where a young new leader comes, he says, look, I don't have a problem with the old leaders. This is a different way. We want to do this in this way. And the status quo parties, they start to, really give him a hard time because they see that as a threat. I tell you personally, I've been an imam in multiple places. And when I moved out from a community and I moved to a new place, I still follow the community, what they're doing. And sometimes I see the new imam coming after me and changing some things. How do you think it makes me feel? Makes me feel, I wish it made me feel good. But I'm a human being, right? I have to clench my fist and bite down saying, yes, that he's the imam. It's his right to do whatever he wants to do. Okay? He's responsible for it now. But I can feel why is he saying this? Why does he want to change the system to this, to this? I built it with my own hands, literally in some cases. And now this thing is put as old and outdated and he wants to do something new. But this is the way life works, right? This is the way life works. So he says that you don't have to be the one. He says one thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to be the one to bring the change yourself. If you can help change the mindset of the leaders that are already there, and you can let them bring that change, that sometimes might be an easier process, where they won't feel like you are trying to change their position and change their history and their legacy and all of those things. So then he says that you could, when you're challenging authority, you could either build a bridge or you could build a wall. What do you think is a good idea to do? Build a wall or build a bridge? Build a bridge. So he says constantly comparing your team or organization with another team or organization, is that building a wall or a bridge? Wall. You basically think about, imagine if your wife, and I'm talking to the brothers here, if your wife constantly compared you to somebody else's husband. You like it? If a husband constantly compares his wife to other people's wives, does she like it? Now, he might be trying to make a point, which is good, which is that, hey, there's a better way of doing it, but the way that it's done, this is not the right way. It doesn't make anybody feel good. He says, emphatically declaring what we are doing isn't working is also something that makes people feel personally attacked. Blaming the current situation on someone else, like you are the problem, doesn't work. It builds a wall. He says, obstinately offering an ultimatum. If you don't do this by this time, I'm out. Or I will do this, or I will do that. It builds a wall. It does not build a bridge. So he says the most important thing that you need to keep in mind, and I'm on my last page of notes, the most important thing if you want to challenge someone is that your relationship really matters. Your relationship really matters. He says if you are going to bring about something that needs to be changed, you should bring it up at a time when emotions are low, not when emotions are high. You need to find the right time. And you need to have a really good relationship with them. Otherwise, it will be perceived as an attack. He says, if you don't have the best relationship with those who are in power, then I suggest waiting and working on that relationship instead of challenging them. Okay? Make it your strategy that, okay, for the next this many months, I'm going to just work on being a really good follower, a really good friend, a really good assistant, until they trust me and we have a good relationship, then I will bring it up. That's part of your strategy. He says to build trust, you should practice faithfulness. Don't betray them. He says, only bring disagreements when your emotions are low. He says, champion publicly and challenge in private. Okay, apply this to a husband-wife relationship. If your wife, in public, she says, my husband is the best husband. Alhamdulillah, I'm so thankful. And in private, she says, this is something that we can improve on. You would say, yes, I respect that. But imagine if it's the opposite. Where in front of other people, she says, my husband is the worst husband. You'd be like, I don't care about your good idea. I just don't want to follow it because what you just did to me hurts me. So he says, champion publicly and challenge in private. Choosing to trust your boss will lead to more trust between you. He says, adjust your approach to fit the person. You'll have different people you're dealing with. They need different approaches, so adjust your approach. The same approach doesn't fit for everyone. He says, declare your intentions before you challenge. So when you're about to have this meeting with someone saying, hey, look, we need to change this, declare your intention that, look, I'm not here to try to pull your leg. I'm not here to try to embarrass you in public. I'm not here to say that what you have done in the last 20 years is all a waste of time. My intention is not to hurt your feelings. I'm here trying to improve our organization, and now times have changed. There's a new technology. If we do this, here are the benefits of such and such. And he says, ask questions of curiosity and mean it. Meaning, sometimes you just need to ask them, okay, can you explain to me that we are doing this? What's the reasoning? Who came up with this idea? Why did we decide to go with this approach? In order to understand, because you know what? There might be a really good reason that you don't know. So ask questions of curiosity and mean it. And he says, and the last point he says, last chapter, he says that all we need is a perspective shift. We don't need to have a position of authority to be leaders. We can begin right now, right here, today, and become leaders by changing our mindset, which is that we can still have a lot of influence even without the position of authority. He said real leadership isn't about having the authority to lead. Okay, and then just some other points that he mentions about do's and don'ts of leadership. He says one of the things you can do is that identify a good leader, and start to study them, that why this person is followed by others. Why does this person have influence over others? So when you watch them closely, you might see some little things about them, what they do. And I'll end with this example. I know this one imam, a friend of mine. He was the imam of a masjid, and he would do this program on Fajr time on a certain day. And this was an area where people didn't live 5 minutes away from the masjid. Some people lived 30 minutes away. Some people lived 45 minutes away. So I spent some time in the company of this imam, and you know what he used to do? He used to calculate that Brother Muhammad lives 45 minutes away from the masjid. And it's reasonable to expect that it takes Brother Muhammad about 20 minutes from the time that he wakes up to the time that he gets in his car to start driving. So you know what he used to do? He used to give him a wake-up call 1 hour and 5 minutes before Salah. Because he calculated 20 minutes to get ready and 45 minutes drive to arrive in the masjid on time. And he used to get up 2 hours or 1.5 hours before, and he would start calling people and waking them up for Fajr. Knowing their driving time and their preparation time. And you know what? In this masjid, which was in the middle of a suburb, there weren't a lot of Muslims that lived in that area. You have 60 or 100 people that showed up at Fajr time. That is really unheard of in that area, in that situation. So this is an example of leading even though you're not in charge, but rather leveraging your friendship, your relationship, your ability to be a good follower into bringing positive change. So definitely I would recommend this book to anyone and everyone. One thing I would say is that this book is a very, very Christian-oriented book. So there are lots of examples about Jesus, lots of examples, alayhi salam, lots of examples from the Bible. And I think there is nothing wrong about that we believe that all good comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it doesn't matter what religion it comes from. The only reason I mention that is because it is really presented in a very good way. So somebody who is weak in their own religion, I would not encourage them to read this book. But those who are firm definitely benefit from that. Or for those people who may not be firm in their religion, in our religion, then maybe you can pick up a summary of the book where it goes to the main points instead of going through the whole thing where there are lots of examples, and sometimes somebody sees something shiny and they start chasing that and get lost behind that. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Do we have any questions or comments, suggestions? Yes, brother. Yeah. So, were you there for Jummah today? You heard the example of the lion, the lion's hair? So you were not there in Jummah. Okay. So we gave the example that, I'll give you that example in private, but I gave that example 3 times today in 3 Jummahs, which is how you go about a difficult problem. Inshallah, I will share that with you. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Any sisters would like to share, add anything? Yes. I missed that last part. Can you speak a little louder? Influence and leaders are the same, but somebody who has a position of authority is not necessarily the same. So it's either you have a position of authority, but you're not really a leader. Leader and influencer is the same. I use those words interchangeably. Does that explain? Yes, so that's a very important and correct point, which is that every single one of us has a role to play as a leader. The Prophet specifically mentioned, كُلُّكُم مَسْئُولٌ كُلُّكُم رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُم مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. That every one of you is a leader, a shepherd. And every one of you is accountable for your flock. So every single person, and he specifically gives the example, even a woman. In a family situation, a person might say, well, the husband is in charge. The Prophet specifically mentions that a woman has leadership of her own. So every single person does have a role to play at their own capacity and their own level of influence. Any other questions, comments? Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك جزاكم الله خير.